Rink Havorson stood on the bridge of his thoroughly second-hand freighter, the aptly named Rust Bucket, staring at the asteroid Ceres like it had just insulted his mother. For a rock that had been floating in the dark for millennia, it was about to get a lot more interesting. Think it'll be worth the fuel we burned to get here. The voice belonged to Kiva, his second-in-command and the closest thing Rink had to a conscience. If it isn't, I'll personally eat my boots, Rink replied dryly, adjusting the worn controls that still smelled faintly of fried electronics. The ship groaned in a way that suggested it was contemplating retirement on a nice, quiet scrapyard, but Rink wasn't planning on letting it off that easy. "Better than starving, I suppose," Kiva said, flipping switches with the casual familiarity of someone who had spent too much time in the company of malfunctioning machinery. "I prefer to think of it as a forced diet plan," Rink shot back, smirking as the scanner beeped a warning. "Besides, this might just be the payday that keeps us in questionable booze and equally questionable company for a few months. If we don't get vaporized by a random alien death squad first," added Jax, their resident tech wizard and pessimist, who was currently sprawled over a console, surrounded by cables and a cloud of pessimism. "Optimism, Jax," Rink said, patting the younger man on the shoulder. "We'll probably get vaporized by an entirely deliberate alien death squad instead." The ship settled into a lazy orbit around Ceres, its engines whining like a toddler denied candy. Rink liked to think it added character, though he suspected it was more likely to add a fiery end if not properly coaxed. "Heads up," Kiva said, nodding to the main screen where a jagged gash in Ceres' surface appeared. "That's our entry point." "Beautiful," Rink said with a grin that was all teeth and no sincerity. "Let's go meet the neighbors." As they descended, the ship's sensors picked up traces of heat and energy emissions, stuff that wasn't supposed to be there unless someone was hosting an unlicensed party. "Looks like we've stumbled into someone's private stash," Kiva observed, eyebrow raised. "Or they're just really into asteroid interior decorating," Rink replied. "Either way, I hope they've got the good stuff." Rink and his crew made their way into the depot, a labyrinth of forgotten corridors and the ghosts of deals gone sour. Dust coated everything, doing its best to masquerade as a protective layer. "Feels like a graveyard in here," Jax muttered, his voice echoing off the walls. "It is a graveyard, Jax," Rink corrected, picking his way over a crate labeled explosive. "Definitely don't drop. Except instead of bodies, it's filled with bad decisions and worse intentions." They came upon a chamber filled with all manner of weapons, an arsenal that would make any warlord drool. Rink's eyes danced over the merchandise like a child in a candy store. "Jackpot," he breathed, running a hand over a particularly nasty-looking rifle. "If half of this stuff works, we're going to be richer than a corrupt senator. Which means we'll have the same lifespan if we're not careful," Kiva pointed out, her eyes on the scanner that was now pinging louder than a politician's conscience in an ethics meeting. "Always with the doom and gloom," Rink sighed, turning his attention to a door at the far end of the chamber that seemed to hum with a life of its own. "What do you think's behind door number 2? Hopefully not our imminent demise," Jax offered, though his tone was less than convinced. Rink approached the door with all the caution of a cat about to pounce on a laser pointer. He punched a few buttons on the access panel, and it slid open with a theatrical hiss. Inside was a single device, all sleek lines and ominous glows, like something that would definitely void your warranty if you tried to use it. "Well, that's not a toaster," Rink observed, peering at the weapon. "It's definitely not designed for making breakfast," Kiva agreed, running a hand through her hair. "Unless you like your eggs atomic." "Let's not stick around to find out," Jax suggested, already backing out of the room like it had declared open season on tech guys. Rink nodded, a rare moment of agreement. "Right. Let's pack up what we can and get out before whoever owns this place realizes we've been shopping in their murder aisle." They began loading the more portable weapons into their packs, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had been doing this for far too long. "This is going too smoothly," Jax muttered, his words carrying the weight of every horror vid he'd ever watched. "You had to say it," Kiva groaned as the lights flickered ominously. The ship's comms crackled to life, an unfamiliar voice cutting through the static. "To the humans looting our depot, you have approximately 10 minutes to vacate before we reclaim our property." "And who might you be?" Rink asked, his tone somewhere between amused and irritated. "The Intergalactic Revenue Service." "Something like that," the voice replied, with a chill that suggested its owner was probably not a fan of charity. "Aliens," Jax whispered, eyes wide. "Well, we wanted an adventure," Rink shrugged, slinging a rifle over his shoulder. "Looks like we've found one." "What's the plan?" Kiva asked, her usually steady hands now shaking ever so slightly. "Run like hell," Rink said, grinning. "And remind me to renegotiate my contract with fate when we get back." As they made their way back to the ship, the sound of approaching ships filled the air like the world's worst alarm clock. "We need to go now," Jax shouted, already sprinting towards the rust bucket. "On it," Rink yelled, heart pounding as they piled into the ship, systems flaring to life with all the enthusiasm of a teenager on a Monday morning. "Engines are online, but we've got company closing fast," Kiva warned, her fingers dancing over the controls. Rink grabbed the manual controls, gritting his teeth. Time to see if this old girl's got one last trick up her sleeve. The rust bucket roared into motion, its exit anything but graceful as they dodged incoming fire from sleek, alien craft that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a grudge against geometry. "They really don't want us to leave, do they?" Rink shouted, wrestling with the controls. "And here I thought we were such charming guests," Kiva replied, sarcasm dripping from every word. The ship shuddered as enemy fire clipped its hull, systems beeping in protest as though complaining about rude behavior. "Hold together, you piece of junk," Rink muttered, coaxing more speed out of the failing engines. The asteroid belt loomed ahead, an obstacle course that promised as much risk as reward. "Into the belt?" Jax asked, eyes wide with a mix of terror and excitement. "No guts, no glory," Rink replied, steering them into the chaos. "And I'm all out of guts." The ship weaved through the floating debris, enemy ships hesitating just long enough to give them a slim chance at escape. "Looks like they're not as crazy as us," Kiva noted, her voice tinged with relief as the alien ships pulled back slightly. "I'd prefer brave over crazy," Jax muttered, though his eyes told a different story. The ship burst out of the belt, leaving their pursuers behind, at least for now. The crew let out a collective breath they didn't know they'd been holding. "Well, that was fun," Rink said, rubbing his temples as the adrenaline began to fade. "Let's never do it again." "Agreed," Kiva said, though her small smile suggested she was already thinking about their next misadventure. Jax just shook his head, muttering something about finding a new line of work. But for all their complaints, none of them could deny the thrill of the chase, the lure of the unknown. And as the rust bucket sped off into the void, Rink couldn't help but wonder what else the galaxy had in store for them. "You think we'll ever catch a break?" Kiva asked, leaning back in her seat, eyes on the stars. "Hopefully not," Rink replied, a grin spreading across his face as he plotted a course for the next adventure. "Where's the fun in that? Ever get the feeling we're cosmic janitors, cleaning up everyone else's mess?" Rink muttered as he led the way deeper into the depot's shadowy guts. The stale air was filled with the scent of forgotten things, dust mingling with neglect and faint traces of whatever disgraceful activities once took place here. "You mean glorified scavengers hoping we don't get shot," Jax replied, fiddling with a small device that looked like it belonged in a discount bin at a tech fair. "Because that's what it feels like, boss." "Semantics, Jax, semantics." Rink scanned the claustrophobic corridor, illuminated sporadically by flickering lights that seemed to have given up on life half a century ago. Kiva, ever the pragmatist, moved methodically, her eyes sharp, taking in every corner and suspicious shadow. "Why do I feel like we're gonna trigger something nasty?" Jax asked, his voice tinged with anxiety. He paused to adjust his glasses, which were perpetually slipping down his nose. I mean, this place screams trap more than a rigged game of cards. Probably because it is a trap, Rink said with a grin that was more grimace than humor. But wouldn't be the first time luck's given us the middle finger. Beside them, Kiva smirked. We're also running out of middle fingers. Further down the corridor, a door loomed, slightly ajar with a faint light spilling out like the promise of something worse. Rink, leading with the enthusiasm of someone heading to a tax audit, nudged it open with his boot. "After you," he said, gesturing for Kiva and Jax to enter first, ever the gentleman. They found themselves in a control room of sorts, or at least what passed for one among scavengers with a loose grasp on the concept of security. "Looks like the previous owners left in a hurry," Kiva said, eyeing the cobwebs claiming dominion over forgotten monitors. "Or the spiders threw a coup," Jax added, flicking a switch that did precisely nothing except make the dust motes dance. "Half this junk's been offline since before the last great space recession. Just our luck," Rink sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "Jax, see if you can get anything running. Kiva, watch his back. We've got to," before he could finish, the room shuddered violently. Lights that had been comatose flickered to life with the enthusiasm of a corpse rising for morning yoga. Sirens blared, a cacophony like a band of drunken banshees, and red lights bathed the room in an ominous glow. "Ah, there it is," Jax deadpanned. "The ominous death trap we were all waiting for." "No one likes a pessimist, Jax," Kiva said, drawing her sidearm as her eyes darted to the exits. "Just once, I wish we'd stumble upon a trap full of puppies and rainbows instead of doom and gloom," Rink muttered. "But that'd be too easy, wouldn't it?" Jax managed to tap into a terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard faster than the eye could follow. "Looks like we've triggered a security lockdown," he announced, stating the obvious with the air of someone relishing in terrible news. "Yeah, and I'm guessing we're not getting a congratulatory fruit basket for our efforts," Rink replied. Meanwhile, above the surface, sleek alien crafts patrolled the starry void, their hulls shimmering like malevolent fish swimming in a cosmic sea. Inside one, a creature, or rather, a council of creatures, observed a series of holograms depicting the humans scurrying through their depot. "These primitives have found the depot," one of them rasped, mandibles clicking with a sound like a typewriter stuck on a single letter. "Primitives or not, they are resourceful," another replied, its voice a soulless monotone that could curdle milk. "We should intervene before they discover the weaponry," the first intoned, its multiple eyes narrowing to slits. The council made a decision as efficiently as a guillotine, and within moments they were en route to the depot, their ships cutting through space with the precision of a knife through soft butter. Back in the depot, Rink, Kiva, and Jax had made the executive decision to get the hell out. The corridors seemed to stretch out endlessly, each turn another gamble with their lives and sanity. "This way," Rink barked, leading them down a path that might have been a shortcut or a scenic route to their demise. "Assuming the aliens don't kill us, I'm pretty sure this place will," Kiva noted, her voice as steady as the rock beneath them. "Look on the bright side," Rink said. "At least we're not bored." "Yeah," Jax chimed in, "because dying horribly is so much more entertaining." The trio burst into another chamber, this one lined with crates that seemed more organized than the last. A quick glance revealed it was full of supplies that could fetch a pretty penny on the black market, or at least buy them a few rounds at their favorite dive. "Looks like the armory fairy's been here," Rink said, his eyes gleaming. "Yeah, but we can't exactly cash in if we're dead," Kiva pointed out, snapping Rink back to the unpleasant reality of their situation. Jax was already moving toward a console that, by some miracle, was still operational. "Let's see if I can get us past this lockdown," he muttered, fingers flying. "Work your magic, Jax," Rink urged, patting him on the back. "And do it fast. I've got a bad feeling we're about to have company." As if on cue, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, the kind that suggested whoever, or whatever, was coming weren't here for a social call. No pressure or anything, Kiva said, steadying her weapon. Yeah, because my life's just one big walk in the park, Jax replied, sarcasm dripping from his words as he tapped furiously on the keyboard. Outside, the alien crafts landed with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, disgorging their occupants with military precision. They moved with a purpose that spoke of discipline and a healthy disdain for anything breathing and human. Rink, peering into the corridor, saw the first of them, a looming figure clad in armor that gleamed like the abyss itself. Looks like we've got disco ball rejects with guns, he remarked, ducking back into cover. The fun never stops, Kiva said, her eyes narrowing as she took aim. I'm in, Jax suddenly announced, a mix of triumph and relief in his voice. But it's only temporary. We're talking minutes here. Minutes is all we need, Rink said, slapping Jax on the back. Now let's get the hell out before they figure out we're raiding the fridge. They bolted, the sound of pursuit hot on their heels. Rink couldn't help but laugh, a sound as much hysteria as humor. If we make it out of this, drinks are on me, he shouted over his shoulder. That's the least you could do, Jax shot back, feet pounding the ground. As they reached the depot's exit, the ship was already rumbling to life, a beacon of escape in a sea of potential regret. They scrambled aboard, the alien ships closing in behind them like hounds on a scent. Strap in, Rink yelled, diving into the pilot's seat. The rust bucket shuddered in protest, but it got moving. Come on, you old rusting lady, don't fail me now. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring with a sound like a dying beast rallying its last breath. They shot out into space, the alien crafts in hot pursuit, unleashing a torrent of fire. You do realize we're probably not getting out of this, right? Jax said, though his hands moved with the calm efficiency of someone who didn't quite believe his own words. Don't ruin the moment, Kiva replied, grinning despite the chaos. Let's at least pretend we've got a chance. The ship weaved through the asteroid field once more, the enemy craft struggling to match their reckless maneuvers. In the chaos, Rink threw a glance at Kiva. Think we've annoyed them enough for one day? Not at all, Kiva replied, returning fire with a glint of daring in her eyes. The rust bucket burst through the last of the asteroid field, leaving the alien crafts behind, their pursuers unwilling to risk the same reckless gamble. Looks like we gave them the slip, Jax said, slumping back in his seat with a sigh that spoke of exhaustion mixed with relief. For now, Rink said, eyes still scanning the stars. But they'll be back. They always are. And we'll be ready, Kiva added, her voice a promise and a threat rolled into one. So where to next? Jax asked, already plotting a course on the navigation console. Somewhere with fewer homicidal aliens would be nice, Rink replied. But knowing us, we'll probably end up in the arms of another disaster. Then we better bring our dancing shoes, Kiva said, leaning back in her seat. As they sped off into the void, Rink couldn't help but chuckle. Another day, another brush with death, he said, the words a mantra as much as a curse. And as the stars stretched out before them, the crew of the rust bucket prepared for whatever came next, knowing full well that the galaxy wasn't done with them yet. The rust bucket was humming a tune that only a ship on the verge of collapsing could muster. A little screech here, an ominous rumble there, all tied together by the sweet melody of impending disaster. Rink liked to think it added character, but then again, his opinions weren't always the most reliable. The cloaking field's down, Jax announced, tapping furiously at the console. We've basically just sent up a flare saying, hey, come shoot at us. Great, Rink replied dryly. Attracting homicidal aliens wasn't on my bingo card, but I'll roll with it. Kiva, who had been busy fiddling with the control panel, shot a look at Rink that could peel paint. Rink, maybe it's time we rethink our life choices. You know, before they become posthumous regrets. I'm open to suggestions, as long as they don't involve dying horribly, Rink said, suppressing a grin. Suggestions that involve moderate peril are acceptable. The ship's sensors started pinging with the urgency of a toddler at a candy store. Those alien ships are closing in fast, Jax pointed out, because he had a knack for stating the obvious with the enthusiasm of a man announcing the end of the world in a weather forecast. "So, what's the plan, fearless leader?" Kiva asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Rink leaned back in the pilot's chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We could let them catch us and then throw a surprise party." "Everyone loves surprise parties, right?" "Sure, if by surprise you mean ambush and by party you mean execution," Jax replied, not missing a beat. "All right, hear me out," Rink said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as though the very vacuum of space might overhear. "If we can mislead them into thinking this depot's packing heat, they might back off. We give them a show." Kiva raised an eyebrow. "A show?" "Rink, you do realize we're not exactly packing fireworks and pyrotechnics here." "Exactly," Rink grinned. "But we've got Jax." Jax blinked, looking up from his console with the look of a man who just found out he was the main course at a dinner party. "I'm not sure if I should be flattered or terrified." "Think of it as a challenge," Rink said. "You've got a knack for making things go boom when they shouldn't," Kiva snorted. "I remember that time you shorted out half the ship trying to rejig the coffee maker." "Hey, that was an accident," Jax protested. "And I was doing everyone a favor. That machine was a death trap." "Not as much of a death trap as this situation," Rink countered. "We've got to make it look like we've got more firepower than a backwater militia on payday," Jax sighed, already scanning the controls and schematics. "All right, I'll see what I can rig up. But if this goes south, I'm haunting you both." "Deal," Kiva said, smirking. "We could use a ghost to keep things interesting." With a plan, flimsy as it was, set into motion, Rink steered the rust bucket back towards the depot. The alien crafts were close, their sleek forms cutting through the void with all the grace of a predator playing with its food. "Let's just hope these alien types value their hides more than their egos," Rink muttered, flipping switches with a precision born of desperation. Kiva took a position by one of the remaining operational turrets. "And if they don't, we'll make them reconsider." One way or another. Jax was a whirlwind of activity, his fingers a blur as he rigged the depot's remaining systems to put on a light show that would rival a second-rate carnival. "All right, here goes nothing," he murmured, slamming the final button with the enthusiasm of a man setting off fireworks on a sinking ship. The depot sprang to life, lights flickering like a disco on meth. A series of blasts erupted from its cannons, not aimed at anything in particular but enough to suggest that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fearing inside. Rink watched the alien ships hesitate, their movements uncertain. "Looks like they're buying it," he said with a grin that was equal parts relief and disbelief. "Let's hope they don't call our bluff," Kiva added, eyeing the aliens through the targeting sights. "I'm not in the mood for actual combat, unless it involves getting the hell out of here." "But where's the fun in that?" Rink quipped, though his eyes were fixed on the approaching crafts, his grip on the controls white-knuckled. The aliens hovered at the depot's edge, their sleek ships circling as if sizing up a rival. Rink held his breath, waiting for the moment they'd make their move or retreat. "Come on, you ugly bastards," he whispered. "Take the bait." As if on cue, the alien ships finally turned, retreating into the void with the reluctance of schoolyard bullies who just realized they'd brought a knife to a gunfight. "They're pulling back," Jax announced, his voice mingling disbelief with a touch of smug satisfaction. "Guess they didn't want to risk it. And I was almost starting to miss having them around," Rink said, exhaling a long, ragged breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Sentimental as always," Kiva remarked, eyes still on the retreating ships. "Next time let's skip the part where we become space debris." "Next time I'm aiming for a vacation," Rink countered, setting the freighter on a course away from the depot. "Preferably somewhere without homicidal aliens or malfunctioning coffee machines." Jax leaned back in his seat, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "You're aiming high, aren't you?" "Always have, always will," Rink replied. "Now let's get out of here before the universe decides we haven't been punished enough." As the rust bucket sped away from the depot, leaving the chaos and close call behind, Rink couldn't help but chuckle. He knew it wasn't over, wasn't ever over. But for now, they were alive, and that counted for something. "We did it," Jax said, disbelief still coloring his words. "Against all odds," Kiva agreed, and for once there was a note of genuine satisfaction in her voice. Rink nodded. "Yeah, until next time when we'll probably have to do it all over again." "But first," Kiva said, "you promised drinks." Rink laughed, a sound filled with both relief and the faintest touch of exasperation. All right, drinks are on me. If we can find a place that doesn't charge extra for near-death experiences." Jax leaned forward, a twinkle in his eye. "I know a place. It's a dive, but the booze is cheap and the clientele too jaded to care about alien invasions." "Exactly what I was hoping for," Rink replied. "Set a course, Jax. Let's go remind ourselves that there's still a galaxy out there that hasn't killed us yet." The rust bucket surged forward, the stars stretching out before them like an endless sea of possibilities, and because Rink knew better than to tempt fate, potential disasters. But that was tomorrow's problem. For now, they'd cheated death once more, proving that luck, however fickle, was sometimes all you needed. And as the freighter slipped into the expanse, Rink couldn't help but smile. Another day survived, another story to tell, and maybe, just maybe, another chance to find something worth living and laughing about in the dark, unforgiving universe. Rink Havorson sat in the captain's chair of the rust bucket, looking every bit the leader he pretended to be. It was a skill, really, managing to look in control when you were essentially one bad day away from becoming space dust. In the vast emptiness of the cosmos, you had two options: laugh or scream, and Rink found laughter tended to attract fewer unwanted visitors. "All right, team," Rink said, trying to project confidence despite his sinking gut feeling that their odds were about as good as a snowball's chance in a supernova. "We've got alien ships on our tail, and they seem to think we're the main course for dinner. Probably because we basically handed them a menu with rust bucket as the special of the day," Kiva remarked, her fingers tapping impatiently on the arm of her cockpit seat. Jax was in the corner, his head buried in a tangle of wires that looked like a robot's intestines. "I'm working on it," he grumbled. "Just a few more tweaks and I might be able to make us look less like a sitting duck and more like a very angry goose." "Let's hope they are afraid of waterfowl," Rink said, his sarcasm layered with an optimistic sprinkle of dread. The alien ships were closing in fast. Outside the viewport, they could see the sleek, predatory shapes slicing through space like sharks on the scent of blood, their tech so advanced it probably sneezed nanobots. "We need decoys," Rink declared, glaring at the outdated human tech strewn around the control room as if it might magically turn into a fleet of battle cruisers. "Something that screams we're not worth your time." "Well," Kiva drawled, "we're already screaming we're too broke to be worth robbing. Maybe we just need a bigger sign." Rink ignored her, pretending he had a plan. In truth, he was operating on adrenaline and the vague hope that if they faked it well enough, no one would notice they had no idea what they were doing. "Jax, you think you can rig the comms to send out misleading signals?" Rink asked, his tone suggesting it was more of a demand than a question. Jax glanced up, one eyebrow raised in disbelief. "You mean make our ship look like anything but a death trap? Sure, I can give it a shot. Just keep in mind I'm working with equipment that was cutting edge when disco was still a thing. And here I thought we'd set the bar too high," Kiva snarked, settling into her seat with a resigned sigh. Jax, undeterred by the sniping, got to work. His fingers danced across the console, trying to coax some semblance of modernity from the rust bucket's aging systems. "Let's see. Maybe if I reroute the power from life support to the comms." "Jax," Rink interrupted sharply, "we'd like to stay alive through this." Fine, Jax muttered. "I'll just use the power from the, auxiliary coffee maker." "We don't need caffeine in a crisis, right? If I don't get my caffeine fix," Kiva warned, "you might wish the aliens had gotten to you first." Decoy signals began to sputter out from the rust bucket, little bursts of electronic gibberish that Rink hoped looked impressive enough on alien scanners. "Think they'll buy it?" Rink asked, trying to mask his nerves behind a veneer of bravado. They might, Jax replied, adjusting a knob that looked like it had been salvaged from a retro washing machine. Unless their tech is smarter than ours, which, let's be honest, it probably is. Kiva groaned, offering Rink a sidelong glance that dripped with sarcasm. Great. So we've got probably and might on our side. Just the duo I've always wanted backing me up in a life-or-death scenario. Enough, Rink said, though he couldn't quite keep the grin from his face. We've got to work with what we've got, and right now, that's about as much use as a parachute in zero gravity. The signals were sent, and now they could only wait to see if the aliens took the bait. As they hovered on the edges of their range, Rink's mind drifted to the depot, to the idea that maybe they could use it as a makeshift distraction. Jax, how's your remote hacking skills these days? Rink asked, the gears in his head turning with the desperation of a man who knew he was out of options. About as sharp as a spoon, Jax replied without missing a beat. But give me a minute, and I'll see if I can turn that depot into something a bit more exciting. Exciting how? Kiva asked warily. Explosions, maybe, Jax said, the glint in his eye suggesting that he took a certain perverse delight in making things go boom. Or at least something that'll make the aliens think twice before sticking around. As Jax set to work on his impromptu fireworks show, Rink stared out at the alien ships, which were still prowling the void with a patience that was almost insulting. They're still circling, Kiva noted, her voice tight. I'm not sure they're buying the we're big and scary act. Maybe we should add a soundtrack, Rink joked. Nothing says intimidating like a good drum solo, Jax snorted. If only we had the budget for a band. Best I can do is make this depot light up like a Christmas tree, though I'm not promising anything that won't blow us up in the process. Just do your best, Rink said, trying to sound reassuring even as he felt a rush of impending doom creeping up on him like a bad case of space rash. As if sensing their impending implosion, the alien ships began to close in, their movements smooth and deliberate. It was the kind of approach that suggested they were ready to finish what they'd started. All right, here goes nothing, Jax announced, his hands moving with the frenzied energy of a mad scientist. Firing it up now. The depot sprang to life, all lights ablaze and cannons firing in a haphazard display of simulated aggression. It looked like an angry porcupine, and Rink could only hope it would scare off their pursuers. The alien ship slowed, their formation breaking slightly as they seemingly reassessed the situation. Looks like they're hesitating, Kiva observed. Could be a good sign. Or they're just trying to decide if we're worth the hassle, Rink replied, hoping the aliens value their own skins more than their pride. For a few tense moments, the standoff continued, the depot flashing like a beacon of desperation in the dark. Then slowly, the alien ships began to retreat, their engines flickering as they turned away, leaving the rust bucket and its ragtag crew behind. Well, I'll be damned, Rink said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They're actually leaving. Guess they decided we weren't worth the trouble, Jax said, his grin wide as he leaned back in his chair. Smart choice, Kiva added, though her tone remained skeptical, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. Rink steered the rust bucket away from the depot, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. They'd made it through another close call, but it was hard to shake the feeling that the universe was just biding its time before throwing the next curveball their way. All right, team, Rink said, injecting some confidence back into his voice. Let's get the hell out of here before they change their minds. As they pulled away, Rink couldn't help but chuckle. They'd bought themselves a little more time, and in a world where luck was as unpredictable as a cat in zero gravity, sometimes that was all you needed. Hey, Rink, Jax said, eyes twinkling as he studied the controls. Next time, let's try something a bit less suicidal, yeah. Where's the fun in that? Rink quipped, though he knew there was truth in Jax's words. They'd pushed their luck this time, and luck had a funny way of running out when you least expected it. Just think of it as another story for the bar, Kiva said, her smile almost genuine this time. Survivors of the rust bucket, one hell of a ride. Sure, Rink agreed, steering them towards the comforting anonymity of deep space. And next time drinks are on me. With that they set off, leaving the depot and its dust-filled corridors behind, the stars stretching out before them like a promise and a challenge all rolled into one. Another day, another disaster averted, Rink said, more to himself than anyone else. Don't get too cocky, Kiva warned. We're bound to run out of luck eventually. Rink nodded, knowing she was right but choosing to ignore it. In a universe that was constantly trying to kill you, sometimes optimism was the only shield you had. The rust bucket continued on its way, the reassuring hum of its engines a reminder that while they might be a motley crew on a ship held together by duct tape and dreams, they were still going, even if only by the skin of their teeth. And as the galaxy once again lay before them, filled with both promise and peril, Rink grinned. After all, you either laughed or screamed, and Rink had always been partial to laughter. Rink had always thought of space as a cold, indifferent void, but right now, with alien ships breathing down their necks, he'd have given anything for a little more indifference. The depot was a labyrinth of forgotten tech and stale air, stretching out like the universe's worst haunted house. At least ghosts didn't pilot ships that could obliterate you with a sneeze. Remind me why we're risking our necks in this dusty death trap again, Kiva groused, her voice echoing through the narrow corridor as she followed Rink deeper into the shadows. Because sitting still is a surefire way to get turned into star dust, Rink answered, not bothering to look back. Besides, maybe we'll find something useful. Like an old vending machine that dispenses luck. Too bad we left our coins back in the ship, Kiva grumbled, her sarcasm as thick as the dust they were kicking up. Keep your eyes peeled for anything that doesn't look like it belongs in a museum, Jax chimed in, his voice crackling over the comms. I'm scanning for anything we can use, but this place is like a tech graveyard. We should have brought flowers, Kiva said with a dark chuckle. Pay our respects to the forgotten junk. Rink pressed on, his mind racing as he tried to figure out their next move. The alien ships were still out there, prowling, probably trying to decide if they were worth the effort of extermination. For once, Rink hoped they'd come off as too pathetic to bother with. We need a miracle, Rink muttered under his breath, staring at the walls as if they might offer up a solution. And wouldn't you know it, fate decided to throw him a half-baked bone. Guys, I'm picking up something weird, Jax said, his tone shifting from resigned to intrigued. There's a signal coming from deeper in the depot. Old human tech, but it's still got some juice. Old tech. Like what? A toaster, Kiva jabbed, though her interest was piqued despite herself. Could be older than that, maybe something from the era when we thought perms were a good idea, Jax replied, his humor a little forced, but the discovery had injected a spark of hope into the otherwise bleak situation. Lead the way, fearless leader, Kiva said, gesturing for Rink to take point. Maybe we'll find a hair dryer to go with that perm. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the bowels of the ancient structure. The air was thick, like a veteran smoker's lung, and the silence had an oppressive weight to it. This place gives me the creeps, Kiva said, shivering slightly. Like it's waiting for something. Well, if it's been waiting for us, it's got terrible taste, Rink quipped. We're the equivalent of showing up to a wedding in moth-eaten pajamas. Jax's voice crackled through again. I'm seeing traces of an AI system. Very old, possibly pre-fall era. It might be just what we need. Or it's a glorified calculator, Kiva countered. Thumbs up for optimism, though. Rink's heart thudded in his chest, a mix of dread and excitement. An AI could be their salvation or their undoing. But what choice did they have? When you're drowning, you grab hold of any piece of flotsam that floats your way. They finally reached a large chamber, filled with dormant machinery and what looked like the remnants of a control center. In the middle of the room was a console, its surface covered in dust, but the faint glow of a screen promised something more than just rust and obsolescence. Well, look at that, Rink said, dusting off the console. "We've found the brain." "Let's hope it's got more than 2 brain cells left to rub together," Kiva said, leaning over his shoulder. Jax's face appeared on a small screen built into the console, his expression one of cautious excitement. "All right, let me see if I can coax it into life. Stand back, this might get interesting." Rink and Kiva exchanged a glance. Interesting in Jax's vocabulary usually preceded a potential explosion, but desperate times and all that. Jax's hands danced over the controls, and with a flicker and a hum the console roared to life. It was dim, barely readable but functional. Rink couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. "Welcome," a synthetic voice crackled from the speakers, sounding as ancient as the tech it controlled. "I am Sentinel AI 404, at your service." Sentinel AI 404. "Sounds like an error message," Kiva quipped, crossing her arms. "You're not wrong," Rink said, addressing the AI. "But right now you're the most beautiful error we've come across. We could use some help here. You see, there's this little problem involving aliens who'd love to turn us into stardust." The AI paused, as if processing this less-than-usual request. "Records indicate hostile entities detected." Initiating assessment protocols. Jax's face on the screen was a picture of triumph. "It's actually working." "Good, because I'd rather not die in a place that's less lively than a graveyard," Kiva said, glancing around the dusty, decrepit room. Sentinel AI 404 word, lights flickering across its interface. "Limited defensive capabilities available." Initiating external manipulation protocol. "English, please," Rink asked, hoping for something less cryptic and more helpful. "It means," Jax explained, barely able to hide his grin, "it can control some of the depot systems remotely. Maybe enough to give us a fighting chance." "Fighting chance, huh?" Kiva said, her skepticism as sharp as ever. "So we're banking on a geriatric AI to save our sorry asses. Sounds about right." Rink gave a tight-lipped smile. "Beats waiting for an alien courtesy call." The AI continued its diagnostics, and Rink felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. If Sentinel could manipulate the depot systems, they might turn this ghost town into a fortress. Or more likely, just enough of a distraction to make a run for it. "Defensive systems online," Sentinel announced, its voice steady and assured. "Recommendations: diversionary tactics and strategic retreat." "Retreat? Now there's a strategy I can get behind," Kiva said, flashing an uncharacteristically genuine smile. "Well, if it's good enough for our wise and all-knowing AI, I say we follow its advice," Rink said, injecting as much bravado as he could muster into his voice. "The Major's right," Jax said. "Let's use what we've got and get the hell out of here before our friends decide to drop back in." "All right, Sentinel, show us what you can do," Rink said, stepping back. "Make it look like we're more than just a bunch of space hobos." With a series of mechanical clanks and wheezes, the depot began to stir. Drones long dormant fluttered to life, their lights flickering like fireflies on a drunken bender. Turrets creaked into position, though whether they'd fire anything more lethal than dust balls was anyone's guess. "Looks like the old girl's still got some fight left," Jax said, admiration in his voice. "Yeah, but for how long?" Kiva wondered aloud, casting a wary eye at a turret that looked more ready to collapse than defend. "Long enough, hopefully," Rink said, his eyes locked on the console. "Sentinel, keep those defenses going as long as you can." "We're making a break for it." "As you command," the AI replied, its voice carrying a hint of what might have been pride or just an audio glitch. Initiating full defensive measures. The depot's systems roared to life, a cacophony of clattering gears and whirring servos echoing through the corridors like an orchestra of the damned. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "All right, let's move," Rink barked, adrenaline surging as he led the charge back through the tunnels. Time to see if that AI got more than just a big mouth. They sprinted back the way they'd come, the sound of rickety defenses coming to life in their wake. Sentinel had given them a head start, and in this game of cosmic hide-and-seek, every second counted. Back aboard the rust bucket, they strapped in, the ship creaking in protest as if aware of the impending chaos. The alien ships were still lurking, but with the depot's unexpected revival, they'd been given pause. "Jax, get us out of here," Rink ordered, settling into the pilot's seat and desperately willing the engines to cooperate. "On it," Jax said, hands a blur over the controls. "Let's hope our decoy show keeps them entertained long enough." "You mean besides the spectacle of us trying not to die?" Kiva added, her wit as sharp in crisis as ever. The rust bucket's engines roared to life with all the enthusiasm of a dying moose, but it was enough. They peeled away from the depot, trailing debris and hope in equal measure. Rink couldn't resist a glance back as they sped into the void, watching as the depot lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Sentinel might not hold the aliens off forever, but it didn't have to. "We're clear," Jax announced, relief palpable in his voice. "The aliens are hesitating, probably trying to figure out if it's worth the effort." "Let's hope they decide it's not," Rink said, steering them into the black. "And that Sentinel's last stand gives them something to think about." "Here's to hoping," Kiva said, leaning back in her seat. "And maybe next time we'll hit a depot with an actual defense system." Rink laughed, the sound more genuine than it had been in days. "I'll drink to that." "Assuming we find somewhere that still serves drinks." With a final wary glance at the depot, now little more than a speck, the rust bucket plunged into the depths of space, leaving behind the chaos but not the lessons learned. In a universe that didn't give second chances, they'd managed to snag one. "All right," Rink said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Who's up for another adventure?" "I'd settle for a nap," Jax replied, the adrenaline wearing off and exhaustion setting in. "Or a drink," Kiva suggested, her tone light but her eyes holding the slightest hint of gratitude. Rink nodded, feeling the weight of their narrow escape lift ever so slightly. "We'll see what we can scrounge up, but first let's find some peace and quiet." "We've earned it." And with that they sailed on, the stars their constant companions, the unknown stretching before them like an invitation or a threat. But as long as they had each other, they'd face whatever came with the same irreverent resolve that had seen them through this far. After all, in a galaxy teeming with danger, sometimes just surviving was its own victory. "Let's hope the universe's sense of humor is better than its sense of timing," Rink muttered, staring out into the endless void. He could almost hear the universe laughing back, a cosmic chuckle that mocked their every move. Kiva, ever the optimist, leaned back in her seat with a tired sigh. "So, what's the plan, fearless leader? Or are we just going to wing it and hope for the best?" Rink grinned, a crooked, weary smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What else do we ever do? But this time, maybe we can use our own brand of idiocy to trip up those alien bastards." "Idiocy as a strategy," Kiva mused, tapping her chin as if considering a fine wine. "I'm in." "We've got the market cornered on stupid." Jax flicked a switch on the console, bringing up a holographic display of the surrounding space. "I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is, the aliens are still scratching their heads over at the depot, and the bad news?" Kiva asked, her eyebrow arched in anticipation. "The bad news is, they'll stop scratching eventually, and we'll be back to playing tag with the universe's least friendly neighbors." "Which is why," Rink interjected, cutting off a rant that was bound to go nowhere, "we're going to set a trap." "A really stupid trap." Jax blinked, his skepticism as thick as the grease on the rust bucket's landing gear. "We're going to outwit aliens who've got technology centuries ahead of ours with stupidity." "Exactly," Rink replied, his grin widening. "They won't see it coming. They're not wired to expect anything less than logical." Kiva chuckled, her laughter a dry rasp in the air. "Good thing we've got logic in short supply." As the rust bucket chugged along, Rink outlined his plan, each step as reckless as the last. The aliens were smart, smarter than humans anyway, but intelligence had its limits. Sometimes, thinking outside the box meant acting like there was no box to begin with. We'll use our ship as bait, Rink explained, tracing a path on the holo display. We'll make it look like we're stranded, systems down, just begging for a rescue or a plunder. Because nothing screams help like a dilapidated freighter, Kiva said, sarcasm oozing from every word. Exactly, Rink continued, unfazed. While they're busy investigating, we'll have scattered a few surprises around. Hit-and-run style. Jax adjusted his goggles, squinting at the plan. You mean booby traps? Like some sort of cosmic home alone, more like a galactic pratfall, Rink corrected. We'll plant drones and charges along their likely approach vectors. Make it look like we've got more firepower than we actually do, and if that fails, Kiva asked, one eyebrow raised in skeptical inquiry. We improvise, Rink replied as if it were the simplest thing in the universe. Great. Should I start writing our eulogies now or later? Kiva remarked, her tone somewhere between dry and desolate. Later, Rink said, or never if all goes well. The plan took shape with all the elegance of a drunken spider weaving a web. They spent hours rigging up the decoy, modified drones, a few charges, and a series of holographic projections that Jax assured them would look convincing enough to fool a blind man, which was roughly the level of sophistication they hoped the aliens would bring to this encounter. Okay, I think we're ready to give this idiotic masterpiece a try, Jax said finally, wiping a smudge of grease off his brow. If this doesn't work, at least it'll be one hell of a light show. Showtime, Rink said, feeling adrenaline spike through his veins. Let's see if we can't give those aliens something to chew on. The rust bucket drifted into position, a seemingly derelict ship lost in the vastness of space. The aliens took the bait, drawn in by the promise of easy prey, their sleek ships closing in like sharks scenting blood. Here they come, Kiva said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. Ready to spring the trap on my mark, Rink said, his eyes glued to the display. The alien ships approached with caution, their movements precise, controlled. They were expecting the usual panic, surrender, maybe a futile last stand. Now, Rink shouted. Jax hit the switch and the space around them erupted in chaos. Drones activated, creating a dazzling show of lights and fake firepower. Charges detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence, making it look like the rust bucket was suddenly packing enough heat to challenge a small armada. What's that saying about fools rushing in? Kiva asked, her voice cracking with tension. Fools make history, Rink replied, watching the aliens scramble in sudden confusion, their ships weaving to avoid the unexpected assault. That moment of hesitation was all they needed. The rust bucket roared to life, engines burning hotter than they had any right to, propelling them out of the immediate danger. Looks like the universe's biggest idiots have bought themselves a little time, Jax said, unable to hide his glee. Let's hope it's enough, Rink replied, keeping a steady hand on the controls. We've got to keep one step ahead, keep them guessing. As they sped away from the trap site, the realization dawned that this gambit was just a temporary reprieve. They'd thrown the aliens off balance, but it wouldn't last long. Got any more bright ideas? Kiva asked, her tone halfway between admiration and disbelief. Just one, Rink said, a spark of inspiration lighting his eyes. We lead them on a merry chase. Make them think we're dumber than we are, keep them underestimating us. Jax chuckled, shaking his head. And here I thought we'd reached the limit of human stupidity. You've just raised the bar, Captain. That's what I'm here for, Rink said, steering them deeper into the void. Let's keep them guessing, and hoping they don't figure out we're making this up as we go. The rust bucket continued its erratic flight, a wild dance through the stars that defied logic and strategy alike. They weaved through asteroid fields, ducked into nebulae, and generally acted like a ship with more bravado than brains. But it worked. The aliens, for all their superiority, couldn't quite pin down the human unpredictability, that unique brand of chaotic desperation. They hesitated, recalibrated, and, most importantly, underestimated. Looks like we've got them chasing shadows, Jax said, reviewing the sensor logs. They're trying to catch up, but they can't match our Let's call it ingenuity. Ingenious, idiotic, same difference, Kiva said, though she couldn't suppress a grin. Well, Rink said, steering them through yet another course correction, if we can keep this up, we might just make it out of here with our skins intact. The rust bucket danced through the stars, a testament to human folly in motion. It was a precarious, ridiculous strategy, but sometimes the best moves were the ones so stupid they circled back around to genius. They say in space you can either laugh or scream, Rink mused, watching the stars streak by. And we've chosen to laugh our way to freedom, Kiva replied, her voice carrying a note of defiance. If nothing else, we'll die knowing we went out with a bang, or maybe a whimper disguised as a bang, Jax added, grinning. The chase continued, a cosmic game of cat and mouse where the cat was smarter but the mouse had a trick or two left up its sleeve. And as long as they kept running, kept evading, there was hope, a slim, improbable hope, but hope nonetheless. Rink leaned back, letting the adrenaline fade as they slipped further into the void. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but for now they were alive and that counted for something. In the end, as long as they kept moving, kept thinking sideways, they stood a chance. Humans had always been good at that, making something out of nothing, turning desperation into daring. All right, Rink said, eyes on the stars ahead. Let's keep them guessing. The rust bucket surged forward, a testament to everything humanity could achieve when it refused to follow the rules. And as long as they had each other, they'd keep laughing in the face of the void. After all, in a universe full of things that could kill you, sometimes laughter was the best weapon they had. The rust bucket bobbed and weaved through space like a drunk staggering home from the pub, or at least that's how Rink liked to think of it. His crew, however, was under no such illusions. They knew it for what it was, a last-ditch effort to dodge the alien noose tightening around their necks. Kiva, seated at the navigation console, punched in coordinates with the speed and agility of someone picking their least favorite song at a karaoke bar. You know, she said, not looking up, in all my wildest dreams, I never pictured our escape plan involving so much dancing. If you can call it dancing, Jax muttered from his station. He fiddled with the ship's sensors, trying to make sense of the chaotic readings. More like a toddler learning to walk blindfolded. Hey, Rink retorted, toddlers have the advantage. At least they're cute and get sympathy. We're more like that stray cat in the alley, everyone wishes it would just disappear. Except this stray's about to pull off a miraculous escape, Kiva interjected. She punched in another series of commands, and the rust bucket shot through a gap in a swirling asteroid field, the space rocks tumbling past like deranged bowling pins. The holographic display crackled with static, barely keeping up with the frenetic pace of their flight. Rink's plan had all the elegance of a rhino in ballet slippers, but remarkably, it was working. The aliens were still on their tail, sure, but they were chasing ghosts, trying to pin down what was essentially an illusion. From the back of the ship, the drone control panel buzzed, a sure sign that Jax's makeshift army was doing its job. The drones, programmed with all the subtlety of a fireworks display, peppered the void with distractions, fake signals, light shows, even pre-recorded cries for help from non-existent ships. The aliens, with all their superior technology, were getting more than a little flustered. Rink could almost picture them, those sleek, elegant ships darting about, trying to figure out what the hell kind of human insanity they'd stumbled into. That should keep them busy, Jax announced with a note of satisfaction, watching the dots on the screen scatter like a kicked anthill. They're still trying to figure out which way is up, and as long as they're doing that, they're not bothering us, Kiva added, her fingers dancing across her console. Speaking of bothering, Rink said, as an ominous beep echoed from the console, we've got a fresh batch of unwanted company. New wave of alien goons incoming. I guess word's gotten out about our little soiree. Fantastic, Jax said, rolling his eyes. Because the first group was such a delight, Rink's mind raced. They had to do something unexpected, which, given their track record, was probably the safest bet. All right, new plan. We double back, Kiva blinked at him. Double back, as in, straight into the path of the incoming ships exactly, Rink replied with a grin as sharp as a knife. They'll never expect it. We'll fly right through them. Brilliant, Jax said, sarcasm dripping from his words like grease from a greasy burger. Nothing says survival like running headfirst into danger. Relax, Rink said, punching the coordinates into the nav system. We'll look like lunatics, which is exactly what we want. They might hesitate, thinking it's a trap, or they might just blow us to bits, Kiva pointed out, ever the realist. Small risks, big rewards, Rink said. Besides, if it works, we'll have a clear path to the depot. We can use its defensive systems against them. The rust bucket banked sharply, engines groaning under the stress of the maneuver. The ship shuddered as they accelerated back towards the incoming alien fleet. On the holographic display, the enemy ships were an advancing line of dots, like an ominous cosmic parade. Ready? Rink asked, his grip tightening on the controls. Do I have a choice? Jax replied, though he was already redirecting power to the forward shields. Brace yourselves, Kiva said, and with a grim smile she added, let's show them what human stupidity looks like up close. As the rust bucket closed the distance, Rink could almost feel the tension crackling through the air. The aliens would have split-second decisions to make, and Rink was counting on them tripping over their own caution. You know, Jax said as a new wave of beeps echoed from the sensors, if we survive this, I'm going to need a very long vacation. Preferably somewhere without homicidal aliens. I'll join you, Kiva said. We'll put it on, Rink's tab. The alien ships began to react, their formations shifting, lines breaking as they adjusted to the unexpected tactic. Right on cue, Jax triggered another set of drones, launching them in a dazzling display of light and sound. The enemy ships hesitated, just as Rink hoped. In that single moment of confusion, the rust bucket shot through, the ship's hull vibrating as they passed within a hair's breadth of disaster. Looks like they blinked first, Rink said, his voice taut with relief. Kiva, take us to the depot. Jax, get ready to activate whatever defenses we can find there. The depot loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the stars, its surface bristling with ancient, half-functional weaponry. It was a gamble, banking on tech that might not even work, but at this point, what wasn't? As they approached, Kiva deftly maneuvered the ship into the shadow of the depot. The holographic display flickered, showing the alien ships regrouping, trying to make sense of the chaos left in their wake. Time to see if this old tech has any bite left, Jax said, fingers flying over the console. The rust bucket docked with a heavy clunk, and the ship's systems interfaced with the depots, a symphony of clicks and whirs echoing through the control room. Rink watched the monitors, his heart pounding. This was the moment of truth. Would their desperate gamble pay off, or were they about to be the galaxy's newest collection of space debris? The depot's defenses roared to life with a grinding sound that was either a very good sign or a very bad one. A series of ancient cannons pivoted, targeting computers whirring with a determination that suggested they hadn't been used in a very, very long time. Here goes nothing, Jax said, hitting the activation command. The depot spat fire, lasers lancing out towards the alien fleet, the ancient weaponry roaring with a ferocity that belied its age. The aliens, caught off guard by the sudden barrage, scrambled to regroup. Looks like we've got their attention, Kiva said, satisfaction in her voice. We need to keep them off balance, Rink said, watching the alien ship scatter, their sleek forms twisting away from the depot's defenses. If they start thinking too much, we're done. Jax adjusted the targeting algorithms, the depot systems responding with a creaky enthusiasm. I'll see if I can make this junkyard sing. The cannons continued their assault, the air alive with the sound of energy blasts and the occasional triumphant cheer from Jax as another alien ship took a hit. This is working, Kiva said, almost in disbelief. We might actually pull this off. They underestimated us, Rink said, a grim smile on his lips, and they'll pay for that mistake. The alien fleet, thrown into disarray by the unexpected resistance, began to retreat, their ships maneuvering away from the depot's deadly embrace. "We've got them on the run," Jack said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and awe. "Let's not celebrate too soon," Kiva cautioned. "We've still got to hold them off long enough to make sure they don't come back with reinforcements." The depot continued its volleys, the ancient machinery pushed to its limits, but holding. The alien ships retreated, their formations breaking apart in a flurry of evasive maneuvers. As the last of the alien fleet disappeared from the scanners, the crew of the Rust Bucket allowed themselves a collective sigh of relief. "Not bad for a bunch of idiots," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "Idiots with a plan," Rink corrected, a rare note of pride in his voice. Kiva chuckled, shaking her head. "I'm going to need a drink after this." "I'll join you," Rink said, a grin spreading across his face. "First round's on me." The depot was secure for now. They'd managed to outwit the aliens, a feat that would have seemed impossible just hours before. But here they were, alive and victorious, thanks to a reckless plan and a healthy dose of human stubbornness. As they settled back, the weight of the situation finally lifting, Rink reflected on the absurdity of it all. In a universe filled with dangers, sometimes the only thing more unpredictable than the cosmos was the human spirit. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "All right," Rink said, his voice echoing in the control room. "Let's get this depot up and running. We've won this round, but there's no telling what tomorrow will bring." The crew nodded, determination in their eyes, ready to face whatever came next. They weren't heroes or geniuses, just survivors. And in the grand scheme of things, maybe that was all they needed to be. The Rust Bucket was finally docked at the depot, creaking under the weight of its own victory. Rink stretched, feeling bones crack like old circuits. "Well," he said, surveying the darkened control room, "looks like we turned this tech mausoleum into our own little fortress." "Fortress is a stretch," Kiva replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "More like a slightly less depressing graveyard." "Hey, graveyards can be cozy," Jax chimed in, peering at a console that looked like it was recycled from a 1980s arcade. "You just have to ignore the corpses." Rink snorted. "Yeah, well, right now, this pile of junk is the only thing standing between us and a one-way trip to Oblivionville. Population, fried human." Jax was already fiddling with the depot's weapon systems, his fingers dancing over the keys like a pianist playing a particularly angry sonata. "First on my list is making sure these guns don't decide to turn on us. I like to keep my betrayals strictly interpersonal." "Good plan," Kiva said, eyeing the flickering lights that suggested the depot's power supply was as stable as a politician's promise. "And maybe see if there's a way to send a message out. Let the universe know we're still kicking." "If we can get the old comms up and running," Rink said, scratching his chin. "We could send something that says, 'Hey, we're alive, and we've got a lovely surprise for anyone who wants to pick a fight.'" Kiva nodded. "A cosmic do not disturb sign." "Exactly," Rink agreed, kicking a loose panel back into place. "Nothing says stay away like a decrepit depot bristling with rusty but functional weaponry." Jax was already rummaging through a mess of wires and ancient circuitry. "I'll see if I can coax these relics into talking. Might take a while, though. This stuff was outdated back when disco was still a thing." "Disco?" Kiva arched an eyebrow. "You know about disco?" "Hey," Jax said, giving her a wink. "I'm a man of many talents, mostly useless ones, but still." Rink focused on the task at hand, clicking his comms to life. "All right, team, let's secure this place. Kiva, make sure we're locked tight. Jax, see if you can boost our signal enough to hit the nearest relay." Kiva saluted with a sarcastic flourish. "Aye, Captain, battening down the hatches and all that." Rink turned to the ancient computer terminal, the screen sparking to life with a whine like an asthmatic dog. He tapped at the keys, trying not to think about how their lives depended on technology that was older than his grandmother. The depot's defensive systems were a patchwork quilt of mismatched components, each one a testament to human ingenuity and desperation. Rink was about as confident in their success as he was in the Rust Bucket's coffee machine not spitting out sludge, but it would have to do. As the crew worked, the dim lights in the control room cast long shadows, the atmosphere growing tense. Even with the aliens retreating, there was no guarantee they wouldn't come back for round two, with more friends and fewer questions. "Any chance of a vacation after this?" Kiva asked, breaking the silence. "Somewhere with real gravity and less chance of violent death." "If we survive," Rink replied, "I'll buy us a planet." "It'll be a fixer-upper, but it'll have a great view," Kiva laughed. "Just as long as it's not another depot." Jax's voice crackled over the intercom. "Signals boosted, Captain. Should reach the nearest relay assuming it's not turned into space dust." "Good work," Rink said, a hint of relief in his voice. "Let's send our message and hope someone's listening." As Jax punched in the final settings, Rink leaned over to get a look at the script. It wasn't poetry, but it didn't need to be. "To whom it may concern," Jax read aloud, "we're alive, armed, and a little bit pissed off. Approach at your own peril. Bring chips." "Chips?" Kiva asked, raising an eyebrow. "What?" Jax shrugged. "I'm hungry." Rink laughed, feeling the tension ease slightly. "All right, send it. And let's hope the universe has a sense of humor." Jax hit the transmit button, and the depot's comms system whirred to life, sending their message out into the void. It was a gamble like everything else they'd done so far, but at least now they had a fighting chance. They waited, the silence stretching between them, punctuated only by the quiet hum of the depot systems. It felt like the calm before a storm, or maybe the pause before a particularly ugly brawl. Kiva broke the silence. "You think they'll come back?" "Probably," Rink replied, settling into a chair that creaked ominously under his weight. "But next time we'll be ready." "Ready as we'll ever be," Jax added, still fiddling with the controls. For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of everything they'd been through settling over them like a particularly heavy blanket. They had survived against the odds, and while their situation was far from perfect, it was theirs. "All right," Rink said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get to work. Secure the depot, run checks on the systems. We'll need to be ready for whatever comes next." The crew nodded, determination flaring in their eyes. They were tired, battered, but not beaten. Not yet. As they set to work, Rink couldn't help but feel a strange sense of optimism. They had fought, survived, and sent a message to the stars. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Hours passed in a blur of activity, the crew working tirelessly to secure their new stronghold. The depot's defenses were as rickety as a drunk on a unicycle, but with a little bit of elbow grease and a lot of colorful language, they managed to get most of it operational. Kiva was busy running diagnostics on the weapon systems, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the controls. "These cannons might be older than dirt, but they've got some bite left in them." "Good to know," Rink replied, checking the power levels. "We'll need every advantage we can get." Jax was hunched over a terminal, surrounded by a tangle of wires and components. "Comms are stable, but I wouldn't count on them being reliable. We might have to resort to carrier pigeons next." Rink couldn't help but laugh. Carrier pigeons in space. Now there's a mental image. "Hey, at least they wouldn't need feeding," Jax shot back. Rink nodded, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's see if we can coax a bit more juice out of this place. We might not get another chance." More hours slipped by, the depot slowly coming to life under their careful ministrations. It was like waking a grumpy old bear, the machinery creaking and groaning but ultimately cooperating. Finally, they took a break, gathering around a makeshift table in the control room. Rink passed around what could charitably be called food, their rations as appetizing as a soggy boot, but as welcome as a rain in a desert. "To survival," Rink said, raising his cup in a mock toast. "May we continue to defy the odds and laugh in the face of certain doom." "Doom schmood," Jax said, clinking his cup against Rink's. "Let them come. We'll just send them packing with their tails between their legs." Kiva grinned, taking a sip of her drink. "And if they don't have tails, we'll give them some." The mood lightened, the camaraderie easing the tension that had settled over them like a persistent fog. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by duct tape, a freighter past its prime, and a shared stubbornness that refused to quit. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, old stories, plans for the future, and the inevitable debate over who had the worst luck, Rink felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. This depot, this crew, this moment, they were all part of something bigger than themselves. Something that, against all odds, had survived. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep them going.